Most ancient civilizations seem to end in fire and ruin. A conquest, a famine, a natural disaster that turned cities to dust and empires into memories. But the story of the Anunnaki is different. According to ancient Mesopotamian myths, they were a council of powerful gods. Mainstream historians explain that their worship gradually faded as cultures shifted over thousands of years. But what if that's not the whole story? A much more provocative theory, one that lives in the realm of ancient astronaut speculation, suggests their departure wasn't a quiet withdrawal, but a panicked retreat. This idea proposes that these powerful beings, who some believe ruled humanity, fled Earth in terror. In this video, we're exploring the speculative theories behind this alleged exodus, from a cosmic war to a cataclysmic event even gods would fear. So, what could possibly frighten a god? So, before we can get into why they might have left, we have to understand who the Anunnaki were. According to mainstream scholars, the Anunnaki were central figures in the Mesopotamian pantheon, seen as the children of the sky god Anu. Their name is often translated as princely offspring. These weren't necessarily distant deities. Sumerian texts describe them as gods who were physically present and established civilization on Earth. Academics view these stories as foundational myths that explain the world and the authority of rulers. But there's another, more controversial interpretation, popularized by author Zecharia Sitchin. It's important to note that his work is widely rejected by mainstream scientists and historians as pseudoscience. Sitchin's theory claims the Anunnaki were not gods, but flesh-and-blood extraterrestrial visitors from a supposed planet called Nibiru who came to Earth to mine gold. In this narrative, the Anunnaki needed workers for their mining operations. Sitchin interpreted mythological texts like the Atrahasis epic, which describes the gods creating humans from clay to do their work, as a literal account of genetic engineering. He claimed two Anunnaki scientists, Enki and Ninti, mixed their own divine essence with an early hominid to create Homo sapiens as a slave race. The Sumerian king list is another astonishing document that gets pulled into this theory. It lists kings who reigned for fantastically long periods, tens of thousands of years, before a great flood is mentioned in the text. After the flood, the recorded reign lengths become much shorter. While scholars see this as a blend of myth and legend, used to legitimize rulers by connecting them to a divine past, theorists argue it's a literal record. They see it as long-lived Anunnaki rulers slowly yielding control to shorter-lived humans. For the Sumerians, these were their revered stories, a recorded past of when gods and mortals interacted. So if they were so deeply embedded in these ancient stories, why does the record of them eventually go quiet? The end of the Anunnaki's prominence isn't marked by some grand farewell. There's no known tablet that says, "We're leaving now." Instead, their presence in historical and religious records fades. Over centuries, they are mentioned less frequently, and later, empires like the Akkadians and Babylonians elevated their own gods. Mainstream history shows this was a gradual cultural and religious shift, not a sudden disappearance. However, it's this lack of a final, definitive goodbye story that has fueled a century of speculation. Proponents of fringe theories argue that the decline feels less like evolution and more like an evacuation. They point to the turmoil and collapse of great Sumerian cities toward the end of the 3rd millennium BCE as evidence of the chaos left behind by a departing ruling class. This void, this lack of a proper ending, invites us to look beyond conventional explanations and ask a more alarming question. What if they didn't just fade away? What if they fled? One of the most chilling speculative theories for a panicked Anunnaki departure involves a devastating war fought with unimaginable weapons. This idea is a cornerstone of ancient astronaut theories, but it relies on unverified and creative interpretations of ancient texts. For instance, some theorists claim a tablet, sometimes referred to as K3657, describes a desolation at the city of Shuruppak, so complete it sounds like the aftermath of a nuclear event. However, it's crucial to note that this tablet and its purported description have not been found or recognized in any mainstream academic or archaeological records. Was this an imagined war between rival Anunnaki factions? Their mythology is filled with conflict. The gods Enlil and Enki, representing order and wisdom, were often at odds in the stories. It's theorized that this rivalry could have erupted into open warfare, poisoning entire regions of the planet and forcing the survivors to abandon the world they fought over. This theory extends to the Great Flood itself. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods are not depicted as calm judges during the deluge. The text explicitly states that the gods cowered like dogs against the wall of heaven, terrified by the destruction. Ishtar, a prominent goddess, cried out like a woman in labor over the loss of humanity. While scholars see this as a common mythological theme of gods regretting a catastrophe they themselves caused, others interpret this as the genuine panic of beings witnessing an event beyond their control. It paints a picture of a panicked flight from a planet that had become uninhabitable, leaving their creations to face the rising waters alone. Another compelling theory, if we follow the ancient astronaut hypothesis, frames the departure as a panicked abandonment of a failing business. If Earth was just a colonial outpost for mining gold, as Sitchin and others have proposed, then their exit could be seen as a massive project failure. According to this view, the Anunnaki were simply administrators. They created a workforce, but what happens when that workforce gets out of control? The Atrahasis epic, a mythological text, describes a rebellion where newly created humans protested their harsh labor conditions. While that story ends with the gods finding a solution, the underlying tension is a theme some theorists latch onto. As human civilization advanced, people began to display more autonomy. They built their own cities, had their own kings, and waged their own wars. The Sumerian kingless narrative of kingship being passed from one city to another could be interpreted not just as shifting political power, but as a series of collapsing outposts where the gods were losing their grip. Perhaps the gold they sought became too difficult to extract, or its alleged purpose to repair the atmosphere of their home planet Nibiru was no longer achievable. Imagine an interplanetary corporation realizing its Earth operation is no longer profitable. At the same time, its workforce is becoming self-aware and rebellious. The logical move? Cut your losses. The panic here isn't from a bomb, but the slow horror of a project spiraling into failure. It would have been a messy retreat, leaving behind infrastructure and abandoning the project. The silence in the records isn't a mystery. It's the sound of a head office shutting down a failed foreign branch. While outside threats are one thing, some of the most dramatic Sumerian myths point inward to a catastrophic civil war among the Anunnaki themselves. This theory suggests their departure was the desperate flight of a defeated faction. The Anunnaki pantheon was never a harmonious family in the myths. It was a hotbed of jealousy and power struggles. The central conflict often revolved around two half-brothers, the stern authoritarian Enlil and the brilliant rebellious Enki. Enlil saw humanity as a tool to be controlled, while Enki often aided mankind in the stories. This mythological conflict is said to have created two opposing titans. A key element in these mythical struggles was the Tablet of Destinies, a divine artifact that granted supreme authority over the universe. Cuneiform records recount that this tablet was stolen on multiple occasions, disrupting the divine order. Imagine a mythological war where the ultimate source of power keeps changing hands. Proponents of this theory argue the conflict escalated into a full-blown war. They interpret the evil wind described in the poetic text, Lament for not as a natural disaster or an attack by enemies, but as the fallout from a divine weapon. In this scenario, one faction ultimately lost. Defeated and facing annihilation, they had no choice but to flee Earth in a panicked scramble. The winning faction, in turn, would have erased the records of the losers, rewriting history. The Anunnaki didn't leave, they were purged. This final theory is perhaps the most humbling. It suggests the Anunnaki didn't leave because of a disaster or a war. They left because humanity had outgrown them. This wasn't a violent overthrow, but a gradual shift in power. The Anunnaki may have kick-started civilization, but the knowledge they shared grew in unexpected ways. They taught writing, math, and astronomy, perhaps thinking we'd remain docile servants. Archaeological evidence suggests that this narrative is overly simplistic. The city of Eridu, for example, dates back to around 5400 BCE, showing that complex societies existed and evolved in Mesopotamia for thousands of years. Humanity was not a blank slate. Over thousands of years, we learned our lessons too well. We built empires, mastered crafts, and started asking questions. The Anunnaki's panic in this context, could be seen as the existential dread of a creator watching its creation become its replacement. They saw a species that multiplied faster than they did and was beginning to wield power that once belonged only to gods. They became redundant. Their departure was a quiet retreat into irrelevance. There was no grand farewell because there was nothing to celebrate. It was an admission of obsolescence. They slipped away, leaving their inheritors to claim the planet. The silence they left behind wasn't an act of malice. It was the awkward silence of a parent who no longer knows how to talk to a child who no longer needs them. They fled, perhaps to watch from a distance, terrified and amazed by the species they had helped unleash upon the world. 4 theories, 4 very different ways to explain one of history's most fascinating chapters. Did the Anunnaki flee a world poisoned by war? Did they abandon a failed mining operation? Were they a defeated faction in a divine civil war? Or did they simply retreat when faced with their own creation, a human race that was rapidly making them obsolete? The clay tablets remain silent on a definitive answer. Mainstream history holds that the Anunnaki were mythological figures whose stories faded over time. But the questions linger, etched into the foundations of our civilization. The stories of their presence, their knowledge, and their mysterious disappearance resonate because they challenge our understanding of our own origins. Perhaps the truth is a combination of these theories, or something we have not yet imagined. As we continue to study these ancient stories, we approach an understanding of the Great Silence. And we're left to wonder, were the figures in these myths running from a danger that is now long past? Or were they running from something that is still to come? What do you think? Which of these speculative theories sounds most plausible, or do you have one of your own? Share your ideas in the comments below, and if you enjoy exploring the biggest questions of our ancient past, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another investigation. Thanks for watching. For centuries, we've pictured them this way, a lonely young couple on a desolate road to Bethlehem. But what if that picture is incomplete? What if Mary and Joseph weren't alone at all? What if they were part of a quiet caravan of hope, a community of faith moving toward a divine appointment? This is the story of the journey you might not have heard and the hidden lessons of trust and obedience they learned along the 70 to 90-mile trek to fulfill a prophecy that would change the world forever. Our story begins not with a choice, but with a command that rippled out from the heart of the Roman Empire. A decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census should be taken. This wasn't just a head count, it was a disruptive imperial order designed for taxation and control, and it required every man to register in his ancestral city. For a carpenter named Joseph, a descendant of the great King David, this meant one thing. He had to leave his home in Nazareth and travel to the small town of Bethlehem. Imagine the weight of that command. Life in Nazareth was suddenly upended. Plans were halted. The rhythm of daily life was broken by the will of a distant emperor. And for Joseph and his betrothed wife Mary, the timing couldn't have been worse. Mary was heavily pregnant, carrying a promise that was both miraculous and misunderstood, a child conceived by the Holy Spirit. And right here we see the first great lesson of their journey, obedience amid inconvenience. Think about it. This was a profound disruption. Yet, in the face of this imperial mandate, Joseph obeyed. He didn't defy or delay, he complied. And in that simple act of obedience, God's sovereign plan began to unfold. Unbeknownst to Caesar, his decree for tax purposes was becoming the very instrument God would use to fulfill a 700-year-old prophecy. The prophet Micah had declared that from the tiny, seemingly insignificant town of Bethlehem, a ruler would come forth. Joseph's inconvenient journey was the very path to that prophetic fulfillment. Now, let's challenge that iconic image of a solitary couple. The roads of Judea were notoriously dangerous and plagued by bandits. It's almost unthinkable that Joseph would expose his heavily pregnant wife to such perils alone. History and culture suggest a different picture. People traveled in caravans for mutual safety and support. This is where our perspective can shift. It's plausible, even likely, that Joseph and Mary weren't alone. They may have been part of a larger community, a caravan of hope. Other descendants of David, also from Galilee, would have been making the same journey for the same reason. Imagine them leaving Nazareth not in isolation, but surrounded by relatives and kinsmen, a slow-moving procession of shared purpose and shared faith. This transforms the narrative from one of lonely struggle to one of communal support, a powerful testament that in God's work we are rarely called to walk alone. Make no mistake, this journey was brutal. The distance from Nazareth to Bethlehem was somewhere between 70 and 90 miles. For a caravan slowed by a woman in the last stage of pregnancy, this trek could have easily taken a week, maybe even 10 days of slow, deliberate travel. There were two main routes they could have taken. One was shorter, cutting directly through Samaria. But this path was tense due to the deep-seated hostility between Jews and Samaritans. It's far more likely they chose the longer, safer route. This path would have taken them east, down into the Jordan River Valley, then south for miles before beginning the grueling steep ascent to Jerusalem and finally Bethlehem. As this quiet caravan moved, lessons were learned with every step. The first is about leaving comfort zones. They left everything familiar: their home, their neighbors, their synagogue. They were stepping out into the unknown, sustained only by their trust in God's promise. Consider the emotional burden Mary carried. Whispers and scandal likely followed her in her hometown, yet she moved forward in faith. Joseph, guided by an angel in his dreams, walked beside her, a steadfast protector of the divine promise. Their journey is a powerful metaphor for our own lives. God often calls us to leave what is comfortable to follow His plan, a plan we may not fully understand, but are called to trust. This brings us to another hidden lesson: faith and vulnerability. Can you imagine what this was like for Mary? Every mile would have been a challenge, every rocky path a risk. Her advanced pregnancy made her incredibly vulnerable. Yet, it's right here, in this vulnerability, that we see the depth of her faith. This wasn't a story of superhuman strength, but of human frailty sustained by divine grace. God didn't remove the hardship, but He provided the strength to endure it. This journey teaches us that God meets us in our weakness. He doesn't always clear the path of obstacles, but He walks it with us, turning our vulnerability into a canvas for His strength. Finally, within the hardship, there was the lesson of finding sustenance in barren places. The Jordan Valley could be harsh, the nights cold, but in the midst of this, there was community. Imagine the evenings, the caravan circled for the night, fires crackling as stories are shared. Perhaps they shared tales of their common ancestor, David, who also walked these lands. Perhaps they prayed together under the stars. In these moments, they would have found sustenance. They were a community of faith, reminding each other of God's faithfulness. It shows us that even when our path feels desolate, God provides springs of hope and fellowship to sustain us. After days of travel, the caravan finally approached Bethlehem. But the town they found wasn't a peaceful village. It was chaotic, overflowing with people who had come for the same census. Every guest room, every corner of lodging was occupied. The Bible's simple, stark statement, "there was no guest room available for them," carries the weight of pure exhaustion and rejection. Even in this crisis, we find another profound lesson. God is in the details. Every single step, every seeming obstacle was a perfectly placed piece in God's grand design. It was Caesar's decree that brought them from Nazareth. It was the long journey that ensured they would arrive when Mary's time was near. And it was the crowded inn that led them to the most humble of settings. Nothing was by chance. What we might see as setbacks or problems, God may be using as setups for His miracles. And that miracle unfolded in a stable. The King of all creation was born not in a palace, but in a place meant for animals. He was laid not in a royal crib, but in a manger, a feeding trough. This is the theological climax of the journey. The destination wasn't a place of honor, but one of radical humility. God chose the lowest of places to reveal the highest of loves. This is the ultimate lesson. Hope is born from humility. The manager wasn't an accident or a backup plan, it was a powerful symbol. The one who would one day call himself the bread of life was laid in a feeding trough in a town whose very name, Bethlehem, means house of bread. The baby wrapped in swaddling cloths was a sign to the shepherds that the sacrificial Lamb of God had arrived, not with power and prestige, but in meekness and poverty. The journey that began with an emperor's decree ended with a divine display of humility, proving that God's greatest works often begin in the world's most overlooked places. The journey to Bethlehem was so much more than a long walk. It was a pilgrimage of faith, a story of inconvenient obedience, and a powerful demonstration of God's perfect timing. We see that the path to fulfilling God's promise is often difficult, marked by uncertainty and vulnerability. But we also see that we aren't meant to walk it alone. Like Mary and Joseph, we are often part of a quiet caravan of hope, supported by a community of faith. Their story shows us that our circumstances don't have to be perfect for God to work. He used a pagan emperor, a crowded town, and a humble stable to change the world forever. The journey itself, with all its challenges, became the very means by which prophecy was fulfilled and hope was born. And this is where their story becomes our story. What journey to Bethlehem is God calling you to in your own life? What step of faith, no matter how small or inconvenient, can you take today, trusting that He is orchestrating the details even when you can't see the destination? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story of a quiet caravan of hope speaks to you. And if this has offered you a new perspective, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone else who might find it meaningful on their own journey. His destiny, so the legends say, was marked from his first breath. He entered the world clutching a blood clot in his tiny fist, a powerful omen in steppe culture that he was destined to be a great warrior. But a prophecy is no protection. This same child was fatherless, a slave, and an outcast, abandoned by his own clan to die on the brutal Mongolian steppe. He was timid, reportedly scared of dogs, bullied by his brothers, and so insignificant that his own father's people cast him aside. Yet he would go on to command the largest contiguous land empire in human history, a visionary who promoted loyal, talented men over entitled aristocrats, practiced a policy of religious toleration, and created new laws. He was a paradox, a ruthless conqueror who united a fractured and violent world, a man of deep spiritual conviction who sought guidance from the sky god before battle, and a leader whose personal journey from utter destitution to absolute power is one of history's most epic tales. This is the story of how a boy named Temüjin not only survived but united a nation and became the legendary Genghis Khan. Before we get into this incredible story, if you enjoy Tales from History, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support is what lets us bring these stories to you. On the vast windswept plains of northern Mongolia, near the sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun, a boy was born. While his birth year is debated by scholars, it's often placed around 1162. His name was Temüjin, meaning of iron or blacksmith. He belonged to the Borjigin clan, a group with a noble lineage but shaky power. His father, Yesuge, was a minor chieftain, a respected warrior, but his influence was just a flickering candle in the whirlwind of tribal warfare that defined the steppe. His mother, Huilun, came from the Olhonud tribe and had been kidnapped by Yesugai from her first husband in a raid. This was the world Temüjin was born into, a world of constant raids, shifting allegiances, and brutal, casual violence. A man's wealth was his horses and sheep, and his life could be ended over a grazing pasture or a stolen bride. There were no nations, just a chaotic patchwork of feuding tribes, the Tatars, the Merkits, the Naimans, and dozens of others. Into this world, Temüjin arrived bearing what was seen as a powerful sign. The secret history of the Mongols, the oldest account of his life, tells us he was born clutching a clot of blood the size of a knucklebone in his right hand. In the mythology of the steppe, this was a sign from Tengri, the eternal sky god, that this child was destined to be a great conqueror. He was marked for greatness from his first breath. But a prophecy isn't protection. The symbols of destiny meant little without the security of a strong clan and a powerful father, and both were about to be ripped away. When Temüjin was about 9 years old, his father took him across the steppe to arrange his future. As was the custom, Yesugai had found him a bride, a young girl named Burta from the prestigious Ongirat tribe. This alliance would strengthen the family's position. The plan was for Temüjin to live with Burta's family for several years, a kind of apprenticeship to forge a bond with his future wife and her people. Yesugai left his son there and began the long ride home. He would never make it. Along the way, he happened upon a group of Tatars, ancient enemies of his clan. Relying on the steppe tradition of hospitality, Yesugai accepted their offer of food. It was a deadly mistake. The Tatars recognized him and poisoned his meal. He managed to stumble home but died a few days later, his last breaths spent urging a retainer to bring his son back. A young Temüjin, not yet 10, rushed back to his family's camp, likely expecting to take his father's place. But the steppe had no patience for a child ruler. His father's followers, the very people who had sworn loyalty, saw only a burden in the small boy and his widowed mother. One by one, they packed their yurts, rounded up their herds, and abandoned the family, leaving them utterly alone on the unforgiving plains. In an instant, Temüjin's world shattered. He was no longer the son of a chieftain. He was fatherless, dispossessed, and socially dead. His prophecy, his noble blood, his future, it all seemed to turn to dust. This was his first great lesson in the nature of power. It wasn't just given by birthright or destiny, but had to be taken and held by force. And it was his first taste of what he considered the ultimate crime, betrayal. It was a taste he would never forget. What followed was a nightmare of poverty and starvation. Elun, his mother, proved to be a woman of incredible resilience. She took to the steppe with her children, gathering wild fruits and digging for edible roots. Temüjin and his brothers learned to hunt marmots and field mice, scavenging for anything to stay alive. It was a life of extreme poverty, which was not just difficult but deeply humiliating in a culture where livestock was the measure of a family's survival and worth. These were the most formative years of Temüjin's life. Historians see this period of constant hunger and danger as the crucible that forged his character. Every sunrise was a victory against death. He learned to be cunning, patient, and fiercely self-reliant. He learned to read the landscape, to track animals, and to endure hardship without complaint. But more importantly, he was learning about the failures of the old system. He and his family had been cast out because there was no law, no authority higher than the selfish whims of a tribe that saw them as disposable. This experience planted a seed in his mind, the idea of a new order, a world governed by laws that would protect the weak and punish the treacherous. He learned that loyalty was the most precious currency in the world because he had seen what life was like without it. The boy forced to scavenge for scraps would one day demand absolute loyalty from millions, and he would build an empire on the lessons learned during these years of hunger. The harsh reality of their survival created tensions within the small, desperate family. Temüjin had a half-brother named Begder, who, as an older male, began to assert his dominance. He stole a fish Temüjin had caught, and later a lark he had shot. These weren't just childish squabbles. They were contests for power and resources where a single meal could mean the difference between life and death. More than that, under steppe custom, Begder might one day have the right to take Elun, Temüjin's own mother, as his wife, consolidating his control over the family. Temüjin saw this as an intolerable threat. He and his full brother, Qasar, decided to act. They stalked Begder, cornering him with their bows drawn. Begder, trapped, didn't beg for his life. He simply asked them to spare his other brother, Belgate. Temüjin and Qasar fired their arrows and their half-brother fell dead. When they returned to the family yurt, their mother was furious. She raged at them, not for the murder itself, but for its stupidity. In their precarious situation, killing one of their own was like cutting off a limb. They had enemies in every direction, and now they were turning on each other. For Temüjin, though, this was a pivotal and ruthless calculation. He had identified a threat to his control and eliminated it without hesitation. It was a chilling preview of the man he would become, someone who understood that to build a new order, he sometimes had to make dark, brutal choices. He would prove willing to sacrifice individuals for what he saw as the greater goals of survival and absolute control. As Temüjin grew into a young man, his reputation as Yesugei's defiant son began to spread. This brought him to the attention of the Taichi-ud, the very clan that had abandoned his family years earlier. Seeing him as a future threat, a man with a score to settle, they hunted him down and captured him. To humiliate him, they locked his head and hands into a kang, a heavy wooden collar that served as portable stocks. He was paraded around their camps, treated as a slave, and forced to endure the scorn of the people who had betrayed him. For a proud Mongol, this was a fate worse than a quick death. It was the ultimate degradation. But even in chains, Temüjin was observing. He watched his captors, learning their routines and weaknesses, and he found an unexpected flicker of kindness. One of his guards, a man named Sorgan Shira, showed him sympathy. Temüjin waited for his moment. During a feast, when his guards were drunk and distracted, he used the heavy kang as a weapon, knocked out his guard, and fled into the night. He hid in a river, submerging himself with only his face above the water. When the Taichi-Ud search parties came, it was Sorgan Shira who found him. Instead of raising the alarm, the guard told him to stay hidden, misdirecting the others. Later, Sorgan Shira's family sheltered Temüjin, burned the kangia from his neck, and helped him escape. From this harrowing experience, Temüjin learned two more crucial lessons. First, he learned patience and to endure profound humiliation while waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Second, he learned that loyalty could be found in unexpected places. It wasn't just a bond between nobles. It could be earned from a common man who chose to help not because of blood, but because of principle. Sorgan Shira's son, Chilan, would later become one of Temüjin's most important generals. He never forgot a betrayal, but he also never forgot a kindness. In his youth, Temüjin had formed a powerful bond with a boy named Jamuka. Though from a different clan, they became Anda, or blood brothers, a sacred pact in Mongol culture that made them closer than kin. They swore the oath twice, exchanging gifts and pledging eternal loyalty. For a time, they were inseparable. As they grew into men, their paths diverged but then reconnected. After his escape, Temüjin was a man with no followers. Jamuka, on the other hand, had become a powerful and charismatic chieftain. They joined forces, and for a while, their alliance was formidable. Jamuka's aristocratic influence combined with Temüjin's growing reputation as a brilliant warrior made them a force to be reckoned with. But a rift began to grow, one rooted in a fundamental disagreement about how society should be run. Jamuka was a traditionalist. He believed power belonged to the aristocracy, the white bone families. Temüjin, though of noble birth himself, was a revolutionary. His experiences taught him that a man's worth lay in his skill and loyalty, not his bloodline. He promoted talented men from lower-born backgrounds, a practice that unsettled the Mongol nobility but earned him the fierce devotion of his followers. The childhood friendship began to curdle into a bitter rivalry. It was a personal struggle, but it was also an ideological war for the soul of the steppe. Would the future of the Mongols be defined by the rigid aristocracy that had cast Temüjin out? Or would it be a new world, a meritocracy forged by the outcast who had clawed his way up from nothing? The two blood brothers were now on a collision course, destined to become the bitterest of enemies. Having survived slavery and begun to gather a small following, Temüjin decided it was time to claim the one piece of his old life that remained, his betrothal to Berta. He traveled back to her tribe, the Ongirat, and presented himself. Berta's father, seeing the determined young man before him, honored the agreement made with Yesugei years ago. Temüjin and Berta were married, and her family provided a magnificent sable cloak as a dowry, a symbol of wealth and status that Temüjin desperately needed. Berta would become the great love of his life and his most trusted advisor, but their happiness was short-lived. In a brutal echo of his own mother's story, their camp was attacked by the Merkit tribe. This was revenge. Decades earlier, Temüjin's father had stolen his mother, Höyelen, from a Merkit. Now, the Merkits had come to claim what they saw as their due. Temüjin managed to escape, but Berta was captured. This was the ultimate test. It was a moment that could have broken him. Instead, it galvanized him. He declared he would not rest until he had rescued her. This personal crisis became the catalyst for his public ambition. He knew he couldn't do it alone. In a brilliant strategic move, he took the sable cloak dowry and presented it as a gift to Togrul, Khan of the powerful Karayit tribe. Togrul had been an Anda to Temüjin's father, and moved by the memory and the rich gift, he agreed to help. Temüjin then called on his other powerful ally, his blood brother, Jamuka. Together, the three leaders assembled a massive army. The campaign to rescue Berta was a stunning success. The Merkit camp was smashed, and Berta was recovered. But the rescue came with a lasting complication. Soon after her return, she gave birth to a son, Jochi. Because she had been a captive for months, the boy's paternity was forever questioned, casting a shadow over Temüjin's family that would have consequences for generations. But the mission had transformed Temüjin. He had successfully marshaled the power of the steppe's most important leaders for his own cause. He had proven his worth as a commander who would stop at nothing to reclaim what was his. A fire had been lit. Never again would anyone take what belonged to him without facing utter annihilation. The rescue of Berta wasn't just the end of a family crisis, it was the beginning of a conquest. Following the victory against the Merkits, Temüjin's reputation soared. Followers began to flock to his banner, drawn to his charisma, his military successes, and his radical new ideas. Temüjin began to build a society that was the complete opposite of the one that had failed him. He shattered the old tribal structures that prioritized birthright over ability. In his army and administration, promotion was based on merit and loyalty, not bloodline. This was revolutionary, and it attracted the most talented and ambitious men in Mongolia, regardless of their station. Men like the great general Subutai, a blacksmith's son, rose to the highest ranks. He also changed how the spoils of war were distributed. Traditionally, aristocrats kept the lion's share of plunder. Temüjin decreed that loot would be shared widely among all the warriors and their families, ensuring the loyalty of the common soldier. He established a code of law, a precursor to his great yasa. While our knowledge of the yasa's exact contents is fragmentary, it is understood to have brought a new kind of order, with severe penalties for crimes like theft and the unauthorized kidnapping of women. He was creating a nation where there had only been tribes. He was replacing the chaos of his childhood with a system of justice and opportunity. The boy who was abandoned because no law protected him was becoming the man who was the law. He wasn't just conquering enemies, he was winning the hearts and minds of their people, offering them a stability and fairness they had never known. Temüjin's new order was a direct threat to the old, and the final conflict was inevitable. The climax was his war against his own blood brother Jamuka. Their rivalry erupted into open war, with Jamuka championing the Mongol aristocracy against Temüjin's meritocratic revolution. The war was brutal and personal. After one battle, Jamuka committed a horrifying act of cruelty. He allegedly boiled 70 captives alive in cauldrons, a deed so shocking it alienated many of his own followers and drove them to Temüjin's side. One by one, Temüjin confronted and destroyed the remaining rival tribes. He crushed the Tatars, fulfilling a long-standing blood feud. He defeated the powerful Karaite under his one-time patron Togrul, who had turned against him. Finally, in 1205, the decisive moment came. Jamuka's own generals, seeing the tide had turned, betrayed him and delivered him to Temüjin in chains. What happened next is a moment of profound drama, according to the secret history. Temüjin immediately had Jamuka's disloyal generals executed, as he would not reward treachery. He then turned to his childhood friend and reportedly offered reconciliation. But Jamuka refused, saying there could only be one sun in the sky. He had lost, and he accepted his fate. He asked for a noble death, one without the spilling of blood, as was reserved for royalty, so that his soul could bless his conqueror. Temüjin honored the request. His soldiers broke Jamuka's back, granting his old friend the end he desired. With his greatest rival gone, the last obstacle to his absolute rule was removed. He had dismantled the world of aristocratic privilege that had abandoned him, replacing it with his own iron-willed vision. In the spring of 1206, on the banks of the Onan River, a great assembly, or Kurultai, was called. All the chieftains of the steppe, men who had once been his rivals, gathered to formally recognize his supremacy. They proclaimed him ruler of all the people of the felt-walled tents, a newly unified nation whose population is estimated by scholars to have been around 1 million people. They gave him a new name, a new title, Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. This was the culmination of it all. The journey was complete. The terrified boy hiding in a river was now the undisputed master of the Mongol world. The starving outcast who scavenged for rodents was now the leader of the most formidable military machine on the planet. The man who had no tribe, no allies, and no future was now the sole source of law for a unified nation. He stood before the men who once would have scorned him, not as a chieftain among chieftains, but as something new, something awe-inspiring. He was the living embodiment of the omen he was born with, the iron-willed leader who had bent the entire steppe to his will. The outcast was now an emperor, but his story was far from over. He had united his world, and now he turned his eyes to the world beyond. The greatest conquests were yet to come. The story of Temüjin is one of history's most extreme tragedy-to-triumph arcs. His rise was fueled by a relentless will forged in the fires of abandonment, starvation, and enslavement. The trauma of his youth became the blueprint for his empire. The lawlessness he experienced drove him to create an unbreakable legal code. The betrayals he suffered fueled his demand for absolute loyalty. The humiliation of being a powerless outcast ignited a hunger for power so immense it would create an empire covering nearly a fifth of the Earth's land surface. He was a paradox. He was a conqueror whose campaigns led to the deaths of millions, yet he practiced widespread religious toleration and protected diplomatic immunity in his lands. He was a nomad who built upon earlier systems to create one of the world's most extensive and efficient postal relay networks and championed trade along the Silk Road. He challenged the old world of aristocratic privilege and built an empire where a man's worth was judged more on his merit than his birth. The outcast who was once scared of dogs became a man whose name would invoke terror for centuries. But in uniting the warring tribes, he brought a period of stability known as the Pax Mongolica to his own lands and, by connecting East and West, helped lay the groundwork for a more interconnected world. His legacy is a testament to the fact that history is not only shaped by grand armies and sweeping ideologies, but also by the raw, burning ambition of a single, indomitable human spirit. What do you think is the most incredible part of Genghis Khan's rise to power? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join us for our next journey into history. The day is done. Rome's great, sprawling heart finally begins to quiet its pulse. Here, in the sanctuary of your domus, on the gentle slope of the Caelian hill, the afternoon's harsh light has long since melted into a deep, velvety twilight. The air drifting through the open colonnade of your garden is cooler now, carrying the scent of damp earth, night-blooming jasmine, and the faint, clean smell of a rain that has washed the dust from the 7 hills. You are at peace. This is the hour for quiet contemplation, when the day's duties, petitions in the forum, debates in the Senate, the management of your estates, can be set aside like a heavy toga. Your chamber, your cubiculum, is a haven of shadows and soft textures. The mosaic floor, a tranquil country scene, is cool beneath your feet. A single oil lamp casts a gentle, flickering glow on the frescoed walls, its flame a steady, golden teardrop making the painted gods and heroes seem to breathe in the wavering light. Its tiny, almost silent hiss is the first sound of your evening's peace, a small comfort against the profound darkness of the coming night. From the small, high window, the sky is a deep indigo, pricked by the first sharp points of stars. The sounds of the household are muted now. The clatter of sandals on stone has softened to a padded shuffle as servants make their final rounds, heading for their own simple pallets, their day's work ending as yours does. Somewhere in the kitchens, you hear the distant, rhythmic grinding of grain for tomorrow's bread, a coarse, whispery sound that speaks of continuity. A heavy wooden door groans as it's barred for the night, a deep, resonant note of security. You are safe. You are home. Outside, the great city murmurs its last good nights. The day's noise has faded, but Rome is never truly silent. The sound is now a low, continuous hum, the rhythm of a million lives settling into their first sleep of the night. From the valley below, you can just make out the fading echoes of life in the Suburra. The sound of laughter from a food stand is carried on the breeze, a brief, happy note in the growing quiet. A heavy supply cart rumbles on a distant road, its wooden wheels groaning against the massive stones of the Via Appia, a reminder of the empire's ceaseless lifeblood. Listen. Beyond the city's hum, other whispers emerge. The breeze sighs as it moves through the cypress trees in your garden, a sound that has rustled through Roman gardens for centuries. This same wind, having crossed the city, now finds the grand, silent form of the Flavian amphitheater. You can't see it from here, but you can feel its presence, a monumental weight in the city's consciousness. Perhaps the wind sings a low, mournful song as it passes through the colossal, empty arches of the Colosseum, a sound that speaks of the day's vanished crowds, now replaced by this solitary, airy lament. It's a sound of immense scale and profound emptiness, a lullaby sung by a giant. The house settles deeper into silence. The kitchen sounds have ceased. The only sound within the walls is the gentle crackle of the small brazier in the corner. Coals, still glowing, shift and settle, each movement a tiny, crisp sound. It is the sound of domestic peace, the very heartbeat of your hearth. From the atrium, you hear the most delicate sound of all, A brief shower passed over the city earlier, and a few stray drops of water still fall from the roof's opening into the shallow marble pool below. Tap, tap, tap. Each drop is a liquid pearl of sound landing in still water, a natural clock measuring the slow, unhurried moments of the deep night. The city's hum has now faded almost completely. A lone dog barks, its voice sharp and clear, and is answered by another, far away on the Palatine Hill. Then, silence returns deeper than before. Your own thoughts begin to slow. The weight of your limbs feels pleasant, a comforting anchor to the soft wool blankets. The mosaic floor, you recall, showed shepherds resting under an olive tree. You are one of them now, a shepherd of your own drifting thoughts, guiding them toward the peaceful pastures of this first sleep. Your breathing deepens, finding the slow, ancient rhythms of the night. Each exhale is a release. Each inhale draws in the cool, fragrant air. You can almost taste the greenness of the garden and the clean scent of high, distant pines. A night owl, Minerva's own creature, calls from a nearby rooftop. Its low hoot a question asked of the darkness. The sound doesn't startle you. It's a thread in the night's rich tapestry, an assurance that all is as it should be. The emperor sleeps, and so the empire can rest. The peace you feel is not just an absence of noise, but the presence of order, a Pax Romana bought by legions and maintained by laws. This quiet chamber, this secure home, is your small piece of that great Roman peace. It is the ultimate luxury, the true secret of imperial rest. Your mind begins to drift. The sounds of the night merge and blend. The crackle of the coals becomes the popping of seeds in a sun-drenched field. The whisper of the wind becomes the murmur of the Tiber flowing patiently to the sea. The boundary between wakefulness and sleep grows hazy. You feel as if you are floating in a sea of history. The whispers you hear are no longer just the wind, but the ghosts of senators debating and the faint lyrical strains of a lush from a long-ago feast. The last conscious sound you register is the faintest one of all, the distant, pure note from the night watch, signaling that all is well. The watch is kept. The city is secure. And you, a noble of Rome, can let go completely, surrendering to the deep, imperial tranquility that lies at the heart of the world's greatest power. The sounds fade into a single, cohesive drone of perfect peace. They become one. They become the sound of your own deep, untroubled sleep. Rest now. Dormi bene. Sleep well. The dawn is many hours away. Rest in the heart of Rome. The night holds you now. For thousands of years, giant figures carved into the desolate plains of Peru have been staring up at the sky. There's a monkey, a spider, a hummingbird, all of them so vast you can only recognize them from the air. For ages, they've been called everything from alien runways and giant calendars to messages for the gods. The questions of how they were made and why have been among history's most fascinating mysteries. But what if the answer was right under our noses the whole time? We are finally learning how the Nazca Lines were made, and the truth is more ingenious than anyone ever imagined. Stretching across more than 75 square miles of arid desert, the Nazca Lines are a staggering collection of geoglyphs, designs literally etched into the earth. There are over 800 straight lines, some running for miles with almost impossible precision, alongside 300 geometric shapes and around 70 breathtaking figures of animals and plants. The biggest figures, like the condor and the hummingbird, span up to 200 feet, about the length of 4 football fields. They were created between 500 BCE and 500 CE, mostly by the Nazca culture, though some of the earliest designs date to the Paracas people who came before them. For decades, we thought we had a rough idea of how many there were, but the story is far from over. In just the last few years, modern technology has helped uncover hundreds of new geoglyphs. This isn't just adding more drawings to the map, it's changing how we think about this ancient wonder. The mystery isn't just what the lines are, but how many more are still hiding in plain sight. So, how did an ancient civilization, with no modern machines or airplanes, pull this off? The answer isn't aliens or some lost advanced technology, it's just brilliant, low-tech engineering. The floor of the Nazca Desert is covered in a layer of dark, reddish-brown pebbles baked by the sun. The Nazca people realized that if they simply scraped away that top layer, only about 4 to 6 inches deep, they would expose the much lighter, sandy soil underneath. This created a massive, high-contrast drawing that has remained visible for thousands of years. The technique itself was simple scraping, but the execution was masterful. Archaeologists believe they used basic tools and a whole lot of careful planning. To create those long, perfectly straight lines, teams likely used wooden stakes and long ropes, almost like a giant chalk line. One group would sight on a distant point, while another cleared the path, allowing them to achieve incredible accuracy over long distances. For the more complex animal figures, they probably created smaller models or grids first, which they then meticulously scaled up on the desert floor. It wasn't magic. It was math, patience, and an immense community effort, a testament to a society's shared vision and organization. Before we get to the breakthrough, we have to talk about the theories that have dominated this conversation for nearly a century. When pilots first flew over the region in the 1930s and revealed the full scale of the lines, imaginations ran wild. The most sensational theory, pushed by authors like Erich von Däniken, was that they were runways for alien spacecraft. But there is zero evidence for this. The ground is soft and the lines are just shallow trenches. They could never support a landing craft. A more scientific and far more influential theory came from the first serious researchers on the ground like Paul Kossak and the legendary Maria Rika. Rika dedicated 40 years of her life to studying and preserving these lines, and she proposed that they formed a massive astronomical calendar. She believed the lines aligned with the sun, moon, and stars to mark solstices and other celestial events, which would have helped the Nazca with their farming cycles. And while some lines do have astronomical alignments, the theory just doesn't explain the vast majority of the animal figures or the hundreds of other lines that point in seemingly random directions. It was a critical piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. So if not aliens or a simple calendar, then what? The real purpose appears to be far more profound, and it's tied to the most precious resource in any desert: water. The Nazca people lived in a region that gets, on average, just 20 minutes of rain per year. Survival depended entirely on their ability to manage water. And recent theories strongly suggest the lines were a central part of that effort, not physically, but spiritually. Many archaeologists now believe the lines were ceremonial pathways. The Nazca would walk these lines in ritual processions, which led to sacred spaces where they performed ceremonies to plead with their gods for rain and fertility. The animal figures weren't random. They were powerful symbols. Spiders were thought to be a sign of coming rain, hummingbirds were linked to fertility, and monkeys were often found in the Amazon, a place of abundant water. They weren't just drawing on the land, they were embedding their prayers into it. This connects directly to their other incredible achievement: a series of underground aqueducts called pukios, which were so well engineered that some are still in use today. They were masters of water, in both practice and faith. And this is where the story takes a wild, modern turn. Between 2022 and 2023, archaeologists from Japan's Yamagata University, working with IBM Research, made a stunning announcement. Using a sophisticated artificial intelligence system to analyze drone and satellite imagery, they discovered 303 new geoglyphs. This AI didn't just find more lines, it revealed a hidden pattern. It seems the Nazca created two distinct types of geoglyphs. First, you have the massive, well-known line-type figures, such as the monkey and spider, often found near large open areas for large community-wide rituals. But the AI was particularly good at spotting smaller, fainter, relief-type geoglyphs. These are often found alongside ancient trails and depict different subjects: domesticated animals, human-like figures, and even shocking images of decapitated heads, a known practice in Nazca culture. The conclusion is revolutionary. The Nazca lines weren't one single message. They were a complex, two-tiered communication system. The smaller figures likely acted as trail markers or spiritual signposts for individuals on pilgrimages, guiding them through the desert. The larger figures were the destinations, the grand stages where entire communities gathered to worship. It was a living map of their faith, etched into the world itself. If you're as fascinated by this mystery as we are and appreciate how technology is unlocking these ancient secrets, take a second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss our next deep dive into history's greatest enigmas. Unlocking the how and why is incredible, but it's crucial to remember the people who created them. The Nazca were not a primitive tribe. They were a sophisticated, complex society that flourished for centuries. Before their culture declined, likely due to severe droughts between 600 and 800 CE, they built major ceremonial centers such as Cahuachi, a vast complex of adobe pyramids and plazas that was once a major pilgrimage site. They were master artisans. Their pottery is famous for its vibrant, multicolored designs, which depict many of the same animals and mythical beings seen in the geoglyphs. They created intricate textiles, evidence of a highly organized society with specialized skills. The discovery of trophy heads confirms they engaged in ritual warfare and ancestor worship. These lines were not the work of a mysterious lost race. They were the legacy of a vibrant, ingenious, and deeply spiritual culture, expressing its worldview on the largest canvas imaginable. The lines are a direct expression of their beliefs, their fears about survival, and their relationship with the harsh yet sacred world they called home. So, we finally do know how the Nazca Lines were made. It was through simple yet brilliant human labor, a testament to what people can achieve with a shared purpose. And thanks to cutting-edge AI, we have a far clearer picture of why they were made. They weren't an astronomical calendar or a welcome mat for aliens, but a dynamic sacred landscape of ritual pathways and ceremonial grounds, all centered on the desperate, universal plea for water and life. But the mystery isn't entirely solved. That same AI study has flagged over 1,000 more high-potential candidates who still need to be verified on the ground. How many more figures are out there? What new secrets will they reveal about the Nazca and their world? The desert is still speaking, and for the first time, we have the tools to truly listen. The story of the Nazca Lines is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most profound answers aren't hidden in the stars, but are written right here on the surface of the earth. We all know the great conquerors: Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon. Their names are etched into history. But what if one of the most brilliant military minds who ever lived is a name you've barely heard? What if I told you about a man who led a tiny army to crush an entire kingdom in just a few months, only to have his loyalty repaid with betrayal? His name was buried by the very emperor he served, and his genius came at a tragic price. This is the story of Flavius Belisarius, the last great Roman general. It's the 6th century, and the Western Roman Empire is a ghost. Rome itself, the Eternal City, is now the capital of an Ostrogothic kingdom. But the empire isn't dead, not yet. In the east, the Byzantine Empire is thriving, its heart beating strong in the magnificent city of Constantinople. And on its throne sits Emperor Justinian I, a man with an impossible dream: to reclaim the lost West and make the Roman Empire whole again. But to pull that off, he needed more than just a dream. He needed a weapon. He needed a general. That general was Belisarius. Born to humble parents in the Balkans, Belisarius climbed the army ranks on pure talent. As a young man in Justinian's own bodyguard, he quickly caught the emperor's eye and was given a command at just 25 years old. But his first real test didn't come on some foreign battlefield. It came in the streets of his own city. In 532, Constantinople exploded in the Nika riots. Furious over high taxes, tens of thousands of citizens revolted, burning down half the city and crowning a rival emperor. Trapped in his palace, Justinian was ready to flee for his life. But Belisarius stood firm. At the emperor's command, he marched his troops into the Hippodrome, the heart of the rebellion, and crushed it with ruthless efficiency. The streets ran with blood. By the time it was over, as many as 30,000 people were dead. It was a brutal, horrific day, but in the cold math of power, it worked. Justinian's throne was safe. And for the emperor, this massacre proved one thing: Belisarius's loyalty was absolute. Now that he'd saved the emperor from his own people, Belisarius would be unleashed on the empire's enemies. Justinian's grand project, The recuperatio imperii, or recovery of the empire, began with a target so risky many called it suicide: the Vandal Kingdom of North Africa. A previous attempt to retake the province had ended in a legendary naval disaster. Even Justinian's own advisors begged him not to do it. The Vandals were a serious naval power. They'd even sacked Rome a century before. But Justinian wouldn't be talked out of it. In 533, Belisarius set sail with a force that looked comically small for the job, only about 15,000 men. He knew he couldn't win with brute force. Victory had to come from discipline, clever strategy, and winning over the local Romanized population. So he enforced iron discipline, forbidding his soldiers from looting or even bothering the civilians. He wasn't there as a conqueror, he was there as a liberator. And it worked perfectly. At the Battle of Ad Decimum, Belisarius shattered the main Vandal army with superior tactics. A few months later, at the Battle of Tricamarum, he delivered the knockout blow. The Vandal kingdom just crumbled. Their king, Gelimer, was captured, and an entire nation fell. In 9 months, Belisarius had reconquered one of the empire's wealthiest provinces, a feat that should have taken years. He returned to Constantinople a living legend. Justinian awarded him a triumph, a victory parade that had been reserved only for emperors for the last 500 years. Belisarius was also made consul, one of the highest honors of the Old Republic. He was at the absolute peak of his power. But in the shadowy halls of the imperial palace, that very success started breeding poison. Whispers reached the emperor that Belisarius planned to make himself king of Africa. Even though Belisarius rushed back to Constantinople to prove the rumors were lies, the damage was done. Justinian now saw his greatest general not just as his best asset, but as his biggest threat. Next, Justinian set his sights on the heart of the old empire, Italy, now ruled by the Ostrogoths. In 535, Belisarius launched his new campaign, starting with a swift conquest of Sicily. He marched into Rome itself, the ancient capital, without a real fight, but the Goths were far from beaten. Under a new king, Vitiges, a massive army, some said 150,000 men, descended on Rome, trapping Belisarius and his tiny garrison of just 5,000 soldiers inside the city. Outnumbered 30-1, the siege of Rome would become the ultimate test of Belisarius's genius. He used every trick in the book to hold the city. When the Goths cut the aqueducts that powered the flour mills, Belisarius simply built mills on boats and anchored them in the Tiber River, using the current to grind grain and keep the city from starving. When the Goths rolled out massive siege towers, Belisarius didn't even waste arrows on the soldiers. He had his men pick off the oxen pulling the towers, stopping the assault in its tracks. For over a year, through brilliant counterattacks and sheer force of will, Belisarius held Rome against impossible odds. Yet, as he was performing miracles in Italy, his own emperor was sabotaging him. The paranoia in Justinian's mind had bloomed into open distrust. Terrified that a victory would make Belisarius too powerful, Justinian consistently denied him the men and supplies he desperately needed. Even worse, he sent other generals to Italy who refused to cooperate with Belisarius, leading to strategic disasters. The Goths saw this division and made Belisarius an incredible offer: betray Justinian and we'll make you the new Western Roman emperor. It was the ultimate temptation. He could have taken Italy for himself. He refused. He declared he would never wear a crown while his emperor still lived. But that loyalty didn't matter anymore. In 548, Belisarius was recalled from Italy and replaced. His great campaign was left unfinished, his reputation tarnished by court politics. He was briefly called out of retirement in 559 to defend Constantinople itself from an invading horde. The old general, given a ragtag force of civilians and veterans, used clever tricks to scare away the massive enemy army, saving the capital one last time. It earned him no praise. A few years later, in 562, he was accused of being part of a plot against Justinian. Though almost certainly innocent, he was convicted, disgraced, and put under house arrest. The story of Belisarius is a powerful reminder of how loyalty can be betrayed and genius can be punished. History is filled with incredible figures whose stories have been forgotten or buried. If you want to help us keep digging them up, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for our next video. Belisarius was eventually pardoned a few months before his death in 565, but he died in obscurity. His spectacular career ended not with a bang, but a whisper. There's a famous legend that Justinian had him blinded and forced to beg on the streets, holding out his helmet for coins. While the story probably isn't true, it captures the emotional truth of his fate. A hero cast aside by the very empire he saved time and time again. In the end, even his victories were bittersweet. The wars of reconquest, while glorious, bled the empire's treasury and manpower dry. The lands he fought so brilliantly to win back were lost again within a few generations. He's remembered as one of the last of the Romans, a final, brilliant flare of Roman military genius in a world that had already moved on. He gave his emperor everything: impossible victories, a restored province, and a loyalty so deep it withstood constant betrayal. In return, he got suspicion, disgrace, and a legacy forever haunted by the tragedy of his fall.